Thank you all so much for joining us on such short notice for this very special presentation about the emergency shelter system here in the Lehigh Valley. This is a special issue for the Community Foundation. In a staff meeting not long ago, we were discussing this as something that we could support from our organizational resources. And so when we decided unanimously as a staff that we wanted to support the shelter system and the things that are going on in that system right now, we also said, well, if this is something that we as a staff are feeling passionate about and think is really important, then we should probably also be sharing this with our partners and donors. And so we put together this quick presentation. We are recording it so that anybody who wasn't available to join us this morning will be able to view the presentation and hear some of the stories. I would like to hand this over to Megan Briggs, who is our Director of Community Investments at the Foundation. She knows
the remainder of the conversation is really going to be around the experts in this space, which is the nonprofit organizations that are doing this work every day, really sharing with us their on the ground perspective of where the challenges are. And this really came about and was lifted up from several different conversations with system stakeholders like Elisa Barada coming up and saying like there's these issues on a systems level, and then also people like Yamalisa and Jessica Lee Ortiz that we partner with often, walking through like some of the situations that they're seeing like on the ground coming into their office and the supports they're trying to offer. So we were hearing this come up in all these different ways and brought together the community really to say like us together need to start talking about this as a larger issue and how we can problem solve together. And I think what's developed is this beautiful sort of opportunity for relationship building and collaboration. And so I really wanted to bring this into this space today to present this information to our fund holders. And so, first, we're going to walk through some of the issues from the systems level, from the shelter organizations and providers, and then the grassroots organizations perspective. So in that way, you can see what's happening on different levels. So first, I'd like to hand this over to Elisa Barada from the Lehigh Valley Regional Homelessness Advisory Board, and also the Executive Director at Third Street Alliance, to walk through sort of the systems perspective and the issues that she's seeing from that lens.
Great, thank you so much, Megan, and I really appreciate all of you being here for this conversation. At the Regional Homeless Advisory Board, we've been working for a long time to look at where we can come up with some solutions. And actually, Charlotte, if you could turn your screen off for a minute, I'm going to go ahead and share a piece that I'm hopeful will put some things in perspective for you. So as you see this up on the screen, this is really third quarter 2021 from July through September. These are the most updated figures we have. So these are people that we have enrolled in our homeless services system. New households coming in this third quarter were 361 households into the system, right? And this is like an incredible number for us to be dealing with. I'm going to scroll down a little bit more to show you that 34 of those really had chronic homeless status. 137 were fleeing domestic violence. 57 were youth under the age of 24. And those are youth that are unaccompanied. We had 16 veterans. I don't have the numbers in front of me really about how many households had children, but if we look at the number of females, these are female-headed households, 181, and many of those are women who are managing households with children. So you can see that the number in the Lehigh Valley is really high. Throughout that first or third quarter of the year, over 900 households were referred to emergency shelters. You're going to hear from the emergency shelters in a little bit. But the issue is we don't have enough space in our emergency shelters to hit anywhere near that number of households. We do not have enough affordable housing, as Dave just made a referral to move people out of shelters into housing and to open up shelter space for folks. So really what has happened over the last several years is a number of local providers, particularly in Allentown, where I would say probably 2/3 of the homeless population is residing across the entire Lehigh Valley. So we have a number of local providers who are rising up to meet some of these needs and are trying to step into the breach, but they're having to respond to a system that is not designed to support them and not designed to support homeless folks. So this is the crisis that we're dealing with as a system, and certainly with the COVID pandemic, this has gotten worse. So a lot of people are out of work or have not returned to the workforce. We have a number of people who are getting eviction prevention support, but that means people are not moving out of housing right now because everybody who can stay is staying. So there's very little turbulence in the market in terms of opening up new units. So we just really don't have the access to inventory that we had pre-pandemic. And now we have more people needing inventory. And you all know the rental crisis, right? People are buying up as much housing as possible, renovating it, raising the prices of the units, and no one can afford what used to be affordable units, just don't exist. So we're kind of in the middle of a big storm, and our system wasn't really designed to meet the needs prior to the pandemic, let alone kind of be as responsive as needed right now. So these are the challenges we're looking at. And certainly one of the biggest challenges, I would say, is while the federal government has encouraged the use of hotel rooms for folks who are unsheltered, we have very few hotels that are actually able and willing to work with us around this. Right? They're losing money by keeping homeless families in hotels because that means their tourist trade, which is really where they make their money, is compromised. So there are challenges around how do we look at the need for non-congregate shelter. Congregate shelter is difficult during the pandemic, right? Because people are sharing space. So how do we look at opportunities outside of congregate shelters and the hotel spaces to develop short-term solutions and then longer-term solutions for housing? So that's really what we look at the Lehigh Valley Regional Homeless Advisory Board. I want to put out a shout out right now to Kathleen Cravelin, who was one of my predecessors as the chairperson of the Lehigh Valley RHAB, and she has been a great mentor to us as we kind of develop this system and move forward. That's really what I have to say about system stuff, and I'm certainly happy to talk a little bit more about that if folks have questions. But I do want to put a shout out to the emergency shelter providers who are here and the grassroots providers, because they are really meeting a need that is immense and unrecognized by most of society. So Megan, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Lisa. So what we'll thank you very much for that sort of overview of the whole shelter system. And Kathy Cravelin, I did see your comment about wanting to know exactly who's in the room from the nonprofit sector side, which we will do for each sort of presentation. We'll shout out like all the organizations who sort of come in with that perspective, so that you will really get to know the individuals who are working in different spaces in the nonprofit sector. So thank you, Elisa, for kind of walking us through that systems lens. So overall, what it sounds like is that there's just a larger number of individuals coming into the system. A lot of them are female-headed households, presumably with children as well, and that there is this push from the federal government to work with hotels, but the hotels in the Lehigh Valley region, at least this year, are not cooperating enough to actually have people in those different spaces. So with that, I want to move to the sort of shelter system provider space and perspective to help us understand from that lens what is happening. And so for that presentation, we have Sarah Massero here from Safe Harbor. Additionally, so I think you'll be speaking to that lens, but I also wanted to shout out Jody from the YMCA. They are doing the shelter in Allentown. And I don't believe I see any other shelter providers here, but please let me know if I've missed somebody. So Sarah, I'll hand it over to you to kind of just walk through from that shelter lens what's happening.
Thank you, Megan. First off, is everyone okay hearing me? Unfortunately, I'm in the office and we still have folks kind of coming through, so I do have to keep my mask on. Is that okay? Everyone good? Yeah, okay, cool. So I firstly just want to put out there that the thoughts that I'm going to be sharing are not all entirely my own. When we spoke as a group last week, the folks from the shelter side of things, we all got on an email chain. And so I've got a lot of different thoughts here compiled from different folks from different organizations providing shelter services. Jody was one of them from the Allentown Winter Shelter. We also reached out to Bob Rapp from Bethlehem Emergency Shelter. Elisa helped out a lot with input, as well as Ben Stevens from Lehigh Conference of Churches, and Sherry Binder as well from Ripple Community Center. Okay. Oh, and Ross Marcus from the Easton Area Neighborhood Center. So in our conversation, there were a couple of things that came up. Some of that is going to piggyback off of what Elisa just shared with you all. Obviously, the Lehigh Valley area has the 3 emergency winter shelters, both in Allentown, or all in Allentown, Bethlehem, and then Safe Harbor runs Easton's. And we certainly have a lot of similar needs. I think there's also some kind of unique needs to each program, as well as providers that are providing more than just that, emergency low barrier shelter. So in terms of operations, one of the things that came up a couple different times was for these seasonal shelters, it's really difficult to recruit and retain employees, particularly in the hiring environment that we have right now. There's a lot of competition for employees. And so a lot of conversations have been had. I know there was a great deal of trouble at the beginning of the winter sheltering season with a lot of the winter shelters trying to find folks to staff the shelter. And obviously with the ongoing pandemic, it has been more difficult to utilize volunteers. There's a lot of folks who are a little bit more wary about volunteering in programs where there's going to be congregate sheltering, and understandably so.
Have to go.
Just,
I'm like
sure.
late for a meeting.
That's okay. Very difficult environment for hiring and retaining folks this year. So one of the things that came up was the need for operational funding for salaries and bonuses to help recruit competitively and retain staff for seasonal winter shelters. Okay. Another big thing that came up over and over again is what Elisa mentioned before. There are a lot of quarantine needs. Congregate shelters, Safe Harbor, certainly, 3rd Street, I know the same. A lot of shelters don't have extra space. If we had a lot of extra space, we'd probably have extra beds in that space. And so when we talk about then needing even more space to provide quarantine, if we have folks who have symptoms that we're waiting on test results back from, or who have been confirmed positive, there's just not that extra space for shelters. And so we have been working to try to get folks into hotel stays. But as Lisa mentioned, it's really, really difficult to find hotels who are willing to work with that. Part of the reason being, we do serve populations that have a lot of complex needs that can be difficult for just a hotel provider to accommodate on their own. And so another big need that was discussed was the need for case management that would work with and follow the folks who are placed into hotels in order to make the experience both for them and for the hotel providers go smoother, and hopefully create more support with local hotel providers to work with us, with our folks, certainly. The other thing that came up with operations and the emergency low barrier type shelter was the need for emergency shelter space for families. So all three of those emergency shelters that I brought up are primarily serving adults, single adults, and no one under the age of generally 18. So there is not a whole lot of space outside of those emergency hotel stays for families who end up in need of temporary shelter year round, let alone during the winter months. The Easton Area Neighborhood Center kind of echoed that need. They're geared a little bit more towards serving families through their roof over shelters. So they echoed that need for more space for emergency shelter for families. I know they're doing a lot of work around those emergency hotel stays as well. And one of their biggest struggles is coming up against providers who will actually work with their folks. And then Jody, do you want to touch on, I know you weren't sure if you were going to be here, so do you want to touch on your points for Allentown, or do you want me to just sum those up? What's best for you?
You are doing a great job, so if you leave anything out, I'll jump in.
Please do. Okay, I'm hoping I've touched on everything here. So Jody had some points that were a little bit more specific to Allentown, although I do think they are probably broadly applicable to most of our emergency shelter programs in the Lehigh Valley here. So there's no year-round shelter in Allentown for all populations to access. So there's some shelters that serve just women, some that serve just families, some that serve men. They all have slightly different entry criteria. So there's not a low barrier year-round option that kind of allows for everyone. I do think that is the same for us in Easton as well. I don't want to speak for Bethlehem. And that's something that our organization has been looking at trying to do to expand our winter shelter to kind of provide something that's a little bit more year-round. And Elisa, I just saw your comment, so I'm just looking here. Yeah, okay, so that's the same with the hotels and struggling to find people to work with our folks. Jody's other point was, so the scattered site model, when you have like a rotating shelter, or if you have different shelters serving different populations, it leaves a lot of gaps. The population that we're working with, they have a lot of barriers. So for them to have to find a new location every night to learn that rotation, it just adds a whole other level to them needing to overcome and access shelter. And particularly, I know there are a couple models where for safety reasons, we're securing vouchers before they come. And so it's difficult because there can be all of these things that kind of serve as extra barriers for folks to enter shelter. Jody, which I think was your next point. When we are sheltering in multi-purpose facilities, like the YMCA, for example, there are best practices and standards that are set for providing low barrier to entry shelter, right? But when we are, for our case, let's say, sheltering co-located with our RHAB program, or in your case, sheltering in the YMCA, which is a multi-use facility. There are some things that we can't do exactly by the best practices because we're constrained by our facility or our location. So that's also something that can be a little bit difficult because it does create those extra barriers for access. And I think that was it. Jody, did I miss anything there at all?
No, I think that sums up most of our conversation with the group for sure. I think the only other thing that came up is that we are, and I can speak to this just from last night again, we are having an inordinate amount of folks that are not Valley residents that are coming in that are homeless. We had 2 last night, one of which is a convicted felon that, just got out of the hospital. So again, it's communications with the hospitals as well. Because he was there for a heroin balloon burst and they released him to us and he was already, it was kind of crazy, but they're not from here. So I think one of our challenges is we can't even provide for those within our purview, and we're having, whether it's being publicized or that like we're the best place in the world to come to is Allentown and Lehigh Valley for services, But I think Bob was having, and Bob, I saw you on the call as well, but we are definitely having an influx of folks, not even within our service area. If they're in our service area, I'm sorry, that's probably not the best way to put it, but they're not our constituents, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we've been seeing something similar with our emergency shelter as well, but I don't think on the scale that that you all probably are getting, because we are a bit smaller in scale. But I think what really resonated and what echoed in the conversation was kind of the sentiment that there's no place for people to go. And I think, we talked about, there is this need for the emergency hotel stays, but there are so many different things that can come into conflict with, like, our target populations and the hotels themselves. Like, they're trying to run a business. If there's no support for our folks in the hotels and it's making things difficult for the business, they're not going to want to work with us. So the idea of having additional support, and the fact that, we need emergency hotel stays, but there's not places that are really super willing, that we need affordable housing, but it's actually harder to find than I think it ever has been. What we've seen a lot is a lot of folks, selling off properties they used to rent, and the amount of, like, the inventory of rentals is just, it was already bad and now it's worse. And so there seems to kind of be this general consensus of there's nowhere for people to go, whether it be, we have money for hotel stays, but we can't place them, or, we have money for rent assistance. And we have people who have vouchers who in the emergency shelter and the regular shelter, and they can't find a place to save their lives and their vouchers are running out. And so I know it's tough because it's kind of this conversation that keeps circling back to affordable housing, affordable housing, affordable housing. But, what the status quo hasn't seemed to work. It seems a little bit worse. And so I don't know. I know in our organization, at least, we're starting to try to be like, all right, so what's something different we can try to do? But that was the general consensus. And anyone who was on the email chain, please let me know if I have missed or glossed over or focused too much on the wrong part. Because there was a lot of good input.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you did a great job with that. Just to add to that, though, also, I know that it was identified in one of the recent meetings that there are 75 blighted properties in Allentown alone. Yeah. And if there's possibilities to actually, again, I don't know if they're blighted to the point where they just need to be torn down, or if they can be rehabbed and actually provide some of that affordable housing. But there is potential to actually have some form of housing. I mean, instead of sitting vacant, there's 75 opportunities.
Yeah, and I know that's a conversation that's been happening, at least here in Easton, with the redevelopment authority, with, I think, CDBG dollars, although don't quote me on that. They've been working on doing some of that here, but I think it's certainly.
Yeah. So I think, thank you, Sarah, for providing that shelter perspective. And what I'm hearing as highlights in this is that while we're talking about an emergency system, there is this larger issue of housing generally, and the housing stock and affordable housing, and housing that is decent for people to live in. And yes. Right now it's just difficult because there is no place to go. And meanwhile, we're having issues in terms of hiring, right, individuals, and also space issues in terms of, if an outbreak does happen at a shelter, like where do we then shift people, because there is no space. Yes. Especially when there are all these barriers in trying to work with the hotels and make sure that when people are in the hotels, they have the case management support that's needed. So thank you for that. I think you have summarized some of the top highlights. And I think also about this is that it is such a complex issue, and we also should all recognize the complexity that does exist in this conversation. So I wanted to make sure we have plenty of time to also talk through from the grassroots perspective, because these providers are one of the most important parts of our system as well. And they are engaged with people every day that have different needs, including housing. And there's a number of grassroots organizations that are on the call today. I'd like to give the opportunity for everybody to just say who you are and what organization you're coming from before we then hand it over to two representatives to sort of speak to this issue from that perspective. So Enid, can I start with you?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Enid Santiago. I'm here from Self Women's Reentry. I'm the co-founder and also the board chair for our reentry program. And we service right here, the city of Allentown.
All right, Jessica, I don't have to call you guys out either. You can just come off mute whenever you want.
Sorry, forgot to do the unmute thing. Jessica Lee Ortiz, Executive Director for the Ortiz Art Foundation. I oversee all the programming and operations here and establish programming and work with all the organizations in our community. And I'm a community ambassador.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yamelisa Taveras. I am the founder and executive director of Unidos. I have 15 years of experience working in the social service field. I am currently a program director for a drug and alcohol facility, so very much connected to our community. And I will also introduce Justin Parker Fields. He got a phone call right now, but I will read his intro that he dropped in the message. So Justin Parker Fields is the executive director of Change Now. It is a local 501c3, as all of the other organizations that have been introduced today. We all do service the Lehigh Valley as well. He did provide his contact information in the chat, as well as his phone number and his email.
Great, thank you, Yamelisa. I don't think we're missing anybody else. And also, when Justin's able to come back, maybe we'll loop back around so he can say a few words as well. So did I miss anybody? Okay, from that level, okay. Okay, great. So I'm not sure who from the grassroots organizations are presenting, but I'm glad to hand it over to you all now.
And that will be me. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see it.
We can see it. Or yeah, we can see it. Looks good.
Perfect. Okay, so today I will be speaking, or at least starting the presentation on behalf of our 4 organizations as a rapid response nonprofit organization partnership here in the Lehigh Valley. I do want to acknowledge one organization that we do support and does a lot of work in the community, especially around homelessness and emergency services, which is Oath. They provide food services, haircuts, showers, laundry services, trades, and training for individuals, especially focused on Tent City. However, going into our presentation today, is it moving? There we go. So Change Now, Self Lehigh Valley, Unidos, and the Ortiz Art Foundation have partnered together over the span of 2 years to address emergency sheltering needs affecting the greater Lehigh Valley. We do want to share that not only being grassroots, but also being 100% volunteer and very much underfunded on an underfunded basis. We focus on inclusive care. We provide services to individuals from all over the city, all over the county, both counties really, Lehigh and Northampton County, regardless of background, race, ethnicity, criminal history, or whatever may prevent them from receiving services from other providers. Our collective mission is to work together to address the immediate needs, at least for this work. We each have obviously our own missions, but collectively we work to address those immediate needs of underserved communities, such as the unsheltered, LGBTQIA+, re-entry, not only from the criminal justice system, but individuals leaving abusive households, fires, emergencies, other types of re-entry as well. We also focus on Spanish-speaking individuals, BIPOC in general, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, and the Latino community here in the Lehigh Valley. So we are impactful. Throughout our presentation today, you get to see some photos of different events where we have all come together and participated and supported one another to create not only an inclusive space, but to make sure that our community, because as grassroots organizations, we are part of the ecosystem of the community. Therefore, we go to the root of the problems. And as we do this work with these rapid responses, we are also providing services where the true needs actually exist, whether it's from employment services, training, providing food, servicing and access, providing access to education, technology, and of course, like I mentioned, reentry and providing safe spaces for our community members. Over the last 2 years, we have received a few different donations that have helped our organizations. And a few of these have been focused especially on this emergency sheltering and providing services and immediate needs to individuals that are experiencing homelessness. Over these last 2 years, we have been able to create over 150 survival kits that I have an entire list of items that were in those kits, over 5,000 PPE care packages because of the pandemic, of course, as well as maintaining, and we, at different locations, we have 24/7 access, food pantries and mini libraries that are available, and they're really focused on our unsheltered populations. So by providing hotel stays, food, crisis intervention, personal protective equipment, and appropriate items for survival during the winter months, we have helped not only to decrease the spread of COVID-19 throughout our community, but also providing protection and belonging to those often forgotten brothers and sisters that we love and cherish, and providing this care with dignity and respect as we all deserve. One of, or a few of the different survival packages, so we have focused on senior citizens. Again, it's a population that consistently gets forgotten about, and I saw that it was dropped in the chat earlier, so that's an increasing population for unsheltered and homelessness. Female focused kits, so it basically had everything that the male packages had, from sleeping bag, warming blankets, disinfectant, first aid kits, water bottles, face coverings, skin protectant. But we also added feminine care products, a whole different array of options for women to be able to have access to. Also, again, as I mentioned, our 24/7 food pantry and mini library, La Bodeguita specifically, that one is located at our headquarters at Unidos at 1329 Hamilton Street. So it's very easily accessible. And also the Ortiz Art Foundation does have a food pantry available. And that last piece there, the weekly food program and distribution, through the months of the summer, they provided food to individuals that were experiencing homelessness from Monday through Thursday, and weekly they provide food boxes to the community. So we are mighty, and I don't know, I can't see who's on the presentation. If Justin is not back, I can continue. If anyone can let me know.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, awesome. So he will take over from here.
Thank you. All right, awesome. Yeah, we can go to the next slide here. All right, so we have utilized the following hotels for last minute emergency stays. These aren't planned. Any of our organizations, our members, our groups will receive a phone call, whether it's from another community organization or an individual in need. And we have to go right from there with whatever funding we have available at that time. I can give an example for 2019 when the pandemic started happening, and even through 2020 when we had the snowstorms. Our organizations were receiving phone calls from Ripple and the Y to try to coordinate emergency hotel stays in the event that there was any overflow issues or not enough beds available, which another individual on this call had mentioned earlier with regards to some of the sheltering. Allentown doesn't have a year-round shelter, unfortunately. And when we talk about boots on the ground, it's not only figuratively, but literally as well within all of our organizations. There was also mention on the call earlier about hotels not wanting to assist us. There's a lot of stigma around temporarily housing unsheltered individuals and families, and that's due to biases and discrimination. And, maybe an idea too would be, maybe to have some of these classes with hotel staff so they can understand that, it's not just the tourists, it's not just the people that are coming in to, view the Lehigh Valley and all the amazing attractions that we have, but it's also to help the individuals and residents that live here. So while this is a short list of hotels that assisted us, at times we had to get a little creative and, put our names down as the attendees for these hotel rooms, just to kind of bypass that stigma, because we do, like Yamlisa stated, we do need, not want to, but we do need to treat these individuals with respect. When we're talking about unsheltered, it's not just people living on the street. There are families couch surfing currently, children in the Allentown School District. Anyone who grew up in the Lehigh Valley who knows of Rooster. Rooster was around when I was a kid in elementary school at Central Elementary School, and this has always been a need. So it's kind of coming full circle for a lot of us growing up in Allentown and being adults and being able to have a hand in assisting and helping out. We can go to the next slide, Yami. We are united. As you can see here, we have some members from the Change Now team and Human Day Kind as well. And that's huge, because a lot of times, and we see, with local politics and local happenings going on in all the cities in the Lehigh Valley, there's friction and there's not a lot of coordination. And what we have always done is we've always come together and we've been united because we have the same goal, helping people in whatever capacity. I'm glad that there are individuals on this call representing the entire stratosphere of sheltering and, the unsheltered and where we go from there and short stay and long-term housing. Where we step in is the emergency shelter stays. We don't have the capacity or the funding currently right now to assist with long-term funding, but if we get a phone call, whether it's nonprofit funding or digging in our own and reaching our own pockets, we're going to try to help. Great, we can go on to the next slide. Now, the cost of the rooms do range in price from week to weekend stays. It doesn't matter, what day of the week it is, if you're unsheltered, you're unsheltered. If anything, the pandemic really taught us that anybody is really a paycheck away, especially middle class and lower middle class income families, from being unsheltered, from couch surfing and splitting families up. Maybe the mother and father have to stay at one place and the children have to stay at another place so they can stay within their school district. These are all real life situations where we come into play as collectively. There have been times where we've housed 4 to 6 families, and not just individuals, but we're talking about families, the markup and the makeup of those families during the emergency stays and during cold weather. If I can use one quick example, myself, Enid, and Yamlisa literally got a phone call all at the same time to help different individuals. And in that, it's like, great, okay, well, we can assist with getting some hotel rooms. We had some funding, but how are we going to get them there? And lo and behold, the Ortiz Arc Foundation, they had a pickup truck. And so they were literally, I'm like, hey, I need you to pick up a family here. We need you to pick up a family here, because it was snowing and it was a snowstorm. And these are real life situations that, that we need assistance with and need funding for. The numbers are staggering. When you put it on paper and add it up, they are staggering, but it definitely does shed light on the need for emergency funding for us boots on the ground nonprofit organizations that aren't receiving the large $1 million grants, unfortunately, as some are in the downtown Allentown area. And as you can see, here's some of our book bags and kits together that we have here. We have Luna here with some additional funding, because we partner within ourselves, but we are at need and service of the greater Lehigh Valley as well. Any nonprofit organization that reaches out to us by phone, by email, by a Facebook message, this is literally emergency snapshot, and we're there. And to be honest, we can pull out some bank records here. A lot of this has been funded with our own personal pockets. It's hard to try to make these funds stretch when you have an immediate need. We don't turn people away and say, hey, sorry, we already assisted 4 families this month. We need to make this funding last. And so maybe we can get you in next month. The need is now and current. So I'm really grateful and thankful to see all of the people that are on this call today to see how we can help out in any type of way. The fiscal sponsor for this initiative with this collective of nonprofit organizations is Change Now Lehigh Valley. Very proud of that. Donations can be made at changenowlv.org with the memo NPO Rapid Response. And we just appreciate you all for your time. We're still going to do the work. You can call us, you can reach out to us, all of us collectively. Here's our contact information, and we'll definitely be sure to share that in the email as well. And just to shed light real quick here, we met up, I think it was a week ago, to sing Christmas carols downtown Allentown, because self-care is important. And you know, Arts Park is a place where there's, you know, always, you know, a lot of unsheltered. So we brought cocoa out, we brought cookies, and just to, you know, momentary, quick happiness in these people's lives, because I mean, why not? They really could use it. So we thank you for hearing us out and for listening to us and for understanding that this is a need. You know, you've done the important step already, which is being on the Zoom and listening. And we're happy to partner and assist going forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin and Yamalisa, and to all the grassroots organizations who are really working hard day in, day out. I see that in the many different calls that we're on, that you are really putting your heart and soul into this work and really making a difference. And I don't think that our Lehigh Valley would be the same without you all. So thank you very much. Some things I heard in there is that grassroots organizations are a part of this ecosystem and a really important part of it, because those folks who can't necessarily navigate themselves to shelter systems end up at the doorsteps of you know, some of these grassroots organizations, or you know, these grassroots organizations are getting phone calls to go pick people up, and we'll meet them where they're at and help them navigate it, especially if they're sort of the individuals who have somehow dropped out of the system that we have in place. And so they're really an important piece of this, and that a lot of their work is unfunded, and that they are really rooted in the Lehigh Valley from growing up here and being embedded in community, and really understand that some of these people that are maybe calling them are their neighbors and people they've grown up with, and so have a deep level of relationship and caring and trust with community. So now that we've kind of worked through these different lenses, I do want to open this up for some questions from fund holders. You know, what are you curious about? What are you interested in hearing? What are some next steps that, you know, we can do together?
Hey, it's Meg. So, hi. So I guess I was just wondering, some of the responses have been rapid responses that you've been doing, and that's certainly a need that's within the community. And I'm just wondering, are there programs or things that you've been doing that have been more long-term, not necessarily only rapid response? Are there capacity needs that you have to increase the amount of shelving or refrigeration or things like that to increase the capacity for you and therefore the number of people you serve? What are your needs in those ways that aren't as immediate, I would guess?
So the Ortiz ARC recently submitted, or is in the process of submitting paperwork to the second harvest, but there are so many current food banks in our area, so it's been a little bit of struggle. But the same kind of way we had to present what we do as a collaborative and how our system is different, we've had to present to second harvest. We're available 24/7. Self headquarters is literally on the same block as my personal home. So if I have to run over there, they have to run to my house. If I have to run up the street to Unidos, if Unidos has to sleep over the ARC, if Change Now has to make it happen, we're all available 24/7, which most organizations are not. If we do get a call late hours, we are available in rapid response. So for food wise, we are looking to expand Jami's Bodeguita, Self has made the initiative to make sure it's filled at all times for them with Unidos in collaboration, so that there's always something there. So if there's nobody available on a phone call, they can at least go to in front of Unidos office and grab the necessities. And it's not just food. She has care items in the Bodeguita as well.
Yes, and as far as thank you, Jessica. As far as your question for, building our infrastructure, maintaining the services that we provide, each one of our organizations does work independently. We work collectively, consistently. However, we are 4 independent organizations, and we each have our own mission and our own services that we have ongoing. So for example, the focus area for Unidos, it includes education, safety, and social inclusion. And we have our cyber learning club that is open to children K through 5th after school and available for parents virtually. Self, and she'll be, Enid will be able to share a little bit more about what they do, but they do house individuals that are in reentry, Justin through Change Now, as well as Jessica. So our programs are not only rapid response. Rapid response is because the need exists, and we are the ones that are in the community, see it, and know that we have to respond, because these are our neighbors. These are our brothers and sisters that may be homeless or may be hungry. And each and every single one of us working and giving our all every single time, every single minute that we have of free time. We know that the reason why we give it all is because we each are a fire, a flood, or an explosion or gas leak away from being homeless. So when someone calls us, whether we know them by name or by face or not, we know that we could be in their shoes tomorrow. But as far as ongoing programs, yes, you can visit each one of our websites and definitely learn more about our programs that we run throughout the entire year.
The way we're successful as a collaborative, for instance, we do reentry, but the door doesn't say women's reentry only or men's reentry. So if I get a woman here, the immediate response is, and she's homeless, although I can help her, I'm long-term, not just for today.
Thank you. Yeah, so what I will say, because I know we're running close to the end of our time together, is that the Community Foundation will send out a list of all nonprofits that were on the call today, as well as the websites that you can find more information around. So we can definitely do that for everybody that's been on the call today. So we have about another minute. So I think it is time to sort of wrap up. I'm sorry we didn't get to more questions. I'm sure you all have a lot. We can always figure out how to bring people together again, and you can also email us, and we can email your questions or concerns, and I'm sure that we can figure out how to get those answered. So
are we able just to provide 1 minute just for Self, for Enid?
Sure, yeah, sure.
If that's okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Monique. So I guess I'll give a really quick presentation because I do have another meeting to jump into. Self Women's Reentry, we deal, of course, with women coming home from incarceration. However, during the 2020 pandemic, we were forced to expand all of our services to deal with anyone dealing with reentry. That is when we began dealing with the unsheltered community. We started getting phone calls, whether it was from women dealing with domestic violence, and larger nonprofits could not help them due to their own rules and regulation, right? We know that it takes 7 times for you to leave your abuser in order to leave forever or not come back. What happens the first 7 times? I'm sorry, it's 8 times. What happens the first 7 times? You're left with what do you do? Larger nonprofits require a police report. And of course, that is for the safety of everyone that they're servicing. So nothing against those rules. I am myself beneficiated from one of those larger nonprofits at one point in my life. But what do you do with those women that cannot file a police report because they're afraid? That is when Self started stepping in and providing emergency hotel stays. We have even flown women out of the state to get them to safer locations, paid for gas cards so they could make it to New York, New Jersey, or wherever they needed to be safe. Then we also started dealing with the unsheltered community calling us for the same reasons. They did not feel safe where they were at, whether it was Tent City, whether they were sleeping in one of the many parking garages in the city that they were kicked out and harassed by the police because they were not allowed to be there. We had women that literally were thrown cold water in the middle of winter just to get them away from the front of the stores here in our city. So the stories are long and hurtful. So that is how we expanded our services. That did not come with an expansion of funding, like everyone else has said on this call. That just started coming up with, what do we do now with all the services that we're providing and not any funding to address them? So we started working collaborative with the rest of these organizations, including Oath. Self at one point served every Sunday lunch meals for, I think it was 6 months in front of their building during the pandemic, because again, everybody shut down and we forgot about the community that is living in the street. Those safe havens disappear overnight. And we started picking up the pieces. And by we, I mean the 4 collected organizations that are here on this call today. We fast forward now to almost 2022. And like everybody's saying, the housing market is just crashing right here in our doorsteps without any sign of slowing down. The unsheltered community is only growing. The faces are changing every day. Self got really, really popular lately by having an 83-year-old lady that we were forced to find services for. I mean, we don't deal with geriatric here. This now got added into our plate. That one followed by a 93-year-old lady recently, right? Because we were just growing the age bracket now. And we're looking for services. We're looking for how could funders understand the grassroots work that is done. When larger nonprofits are able to close the door because of COVID or because of a background record, we are not. Those people are coming to our doors and we have to figure this out one way or another. Financially, all of us have been pulling out of our pocket. And that part alone is difficult. We're 100% volunteer. Not one of the nonprofits on this call is getting any salaries. So definitely is a little bit hard. And I don't want to take any more of your time, but just wanted to give you that quick little background.
Thank you. Thank you. So I know we're a little over time now. Thank you, Enid. It was good to hear from your perspective from Self LV. And I think before we wrap up, I wanted to recognize that it was a really important conversation because everybody who's been on the call today represents a perspective that's a part of the system that are all working in order to try to serve individuals who are unsheltered and experiencing homelessness. And they are seeing this increase and this crisis happening that is complex and hard. And these individuals have devoted their life, their time, in order to try to make a difference in this space. And so I appreciate also the fund holders being on this call to learn about this issue. I think that something's really important for us to understand is like, how can fund holders help here? And, you know, we did get the guidance from Justin around that there is a central organization that can accept donations on behalf of grassroots. And I believe that also individuals can make grants to individual shelters. And then also as a collective, the Lehigh Valley Regional Homelessness Advisory Board is also able to accept grants, correct, Elisa? So we will definitely follow up to get out all of that information to you all. And again, I just want to recognize how important it was that each of you spent time with us on the call today, and appreciate your attention and your questions and your perspectives.